Any fool can write code that a computer can understand. Good programmers write code that humans can understand. Martin Fowler. Welcome back, friends, to our second session of Friday Night Live Coding. In today's session, we are going to go through how to start Visual Studio and write our first computer program. So, let's simplify. So, on my desktop, from our installation in the previous session, I'm going to open my Visual Studio and launch it. So I'll go to my taskbar and hit Visual Studio. So it's going to load and then open our Visual Studio for the first time. So as you can see, Visual Studio. Now if you are new to Visual Studio, it's going to ask you to create a Microsoft account. So it takes less than a minute to create a Microsoft account. So you just create it and then you get back to your Visual Studio and start coding. So as you can see here, this is a recent file. So all the files we'll be dealing with recently will be open here, from whether today to last week to last month. You're going to have all your files and your projects over here. Then you can see clone or check out code. So this is for GitHub. We get to GitHub in the sessions ahead, maybe in the future. And open a project or solution. So a project you already have, you can open it from this side, which is open a project or solution. Then open a local folder. If you want to edit code within any folder, you can open it from here. And then the last part is create a new project. So this is what we are going to do. Today we are going to be creating a new project. So we are going to hit create new project. And then there is one down here which is continue with our code. But we'll get down to that in our future sessions. So for today, we are launching Visual Studio and we are creating our first computer program. So we say create a new project. So as it loads and it brings out our page, if you look at the top over here, we have language, platform, and then the project type. Now the programming language you are going to be using in this session is Visual Basic. So I go to language and choose Visual Basic from the drop down menu. And again, I go to the platform. You're going to be creating a desktop app for Windows users, not iOS or any other user, for Windows users. So you take Windows. And then for the project type, we say desktop, meaning we are going to be creating desktop apps using Visual Basic. Now, if you look through the filtering here, we are going to take Windows Forms app. And within the Windows Forms app, you see Visual Basic, Windows, and then desktop. So this is what we're going to be using to create our first app using Visual Basic. So now that I've highlighted this on my screen, the next thing I'm going to do is to click next. So on our next page, we are going to give a name to this our project. So since this is our our second session, but our first session in coding, I'm going to write session 1. Right? And then here is the location, meaning after we are done with our project is going to be saved in this location: users, Dennis, source, and then the repos. This is where our code is going to be saved. And then the solution name, which is session 1, and then the framework. After creating your app, you'll be deploying your app to a user or a customer. Now you always make sure that you're using the latest version of the framework, which is the .NET framework 4.7.2, and that your customer is also using the latest framework, which is the 4.7.2. So you always make sure you're using the latest framework. So from here, you can also tick this checkbox to enable your solution and your project to be saved in the same folder or in the same directory. But that's for another day. So from there, we go to create, and then we create our first Windows form. So we wait for it as it loads. It takes a while to load our first page, creating our Windows app. So as you can see, creating project session 1. So depending on the specifications of your computer or your laptop, it also depends on how fast things run when you are using Visual Studio. So from here, it's going to open up so that we see our Windows form app. So as you can see here, we have our first form, which is form 1. I'm going to close this pane here and we'll talk more about it later. So when you open your Visual Studio using Visual Basic, this is what you're supposed to see. A window like this with form 1 on top of it. Now if you take a good look at this form app actually looks like the folders we've been opening on our desktop. If you look over here, we have the minimize, maximize, and the close, and then we have the other buttons and other links over here. The same thing applies to our Windows form app. You can see we have the minimize, and then we have this whole space for doing our things. So you can see that we are actually creating a Windows app, sorry, a desktop app on Windows. Now if you look here, you can see toolbox. Naturally the toolbox is by the side like this, so you click on toolbox over here, and then you see the pin here, you pin it. Over here is the tools we'll be using to create our desktop app. Now we have some common tools we mostly use when we are building our app, and then like let me scroll down to see what you see common controls. So these are some of the common tools we use in building our app, like the button, the checkbox, the text box, the label, you can see the text box here, rich box, the radio button, the progress bar, picture box. There are a lot of them. We get used to them as we use them in our project. Now moving from the toolbox, I'll take you to the Solution Explorer, which is on top here. This Solution Explorer contains all the files you'll be using to create your Windows app, and then just down below it you have the properties pane. Now this properties pane here also contains the properties of the tools on this screen. So today, to get ourselves acquainted with the tools and the properties, we are going to be creating our first program. And as a programmer, mostly the first program we all learn to code is Hello World. So we are going to use some of the properties we can see here to create our first Hello World. Alright, so now always in your properties toolbox, you always make sure that it is arranged in an alphabetical order. So you can see alphabetical here, A to Z. This will really help you in manipulating your tools and then naming some of them. Now if you can see on top we have form 1. Now form 1 is not appropriate, it's not an appropriate name for naming your form. Like for instance, if I open my folder here on Windows, you can see on top we have desktop, right, not form 1. So in the same way, we are going to change this form 1 to something more appropriate, something, and in this case, since we'll be printing out Hello World, let's change the name. So always make sure that the name of your form must always begin with a capital letter. So let's say something like message, right, and then you say Ctrl+S to save it. Now after it saves, there are so many default settings we have to change. So let's scroll down. We have font here. We are going to change our font to Palatino. This is Microsoft Sans Serif, but we don't like that. We want to use Palatino as our font, and we want regular. Regular is fine, and then let's take OK. We have 4 color, which is the control text, meaning the text that will be displaying on our form is going to be black, as you can see the color here. Let's scroll down. Now you can see text here, and then we're going to change the name from form 1. It's even though we change the name of the form to message, it still hasn't displayed on top here. It's only going to be displayed when you actually write it down here at the form 1. So you're going to write message, and I say Ctrl+S to save it. Now you can see that the name has changed on top here, so you can see message on top there. Alright, now the last thing you're going to do, I'm going to click here. You can see start position and say Windows default location. Now you always have to make sure that when you run your code, the Windows displays on the center screen, not on the left corner. So I tap here center screen, and then I type Ctrl+S just to save it. So these are some of the default things you always have to do when you are running your code. And then down here, I'll come back. Now let's try and build our first app. So I'm going to make it small since we are just going to be printing Hello World. And I'm going to take this a little in my properties box, more inside. I'm going to squeeze it to be very small, since it's just going to display a message for us. Alright, so now I'm going to take some of our tools. As I said, there are lots of tools. You only get used to them as you use them, right? So I'm going to take the label. I'll drag and then drop the label on my screen. So you can see label over here. Now to name our label, we are going to use our properties toolbox. So in our properties toolbox, whenever you have a label and you are naming the label, the name of the label must begin with LB. So you say LB and then we give it a name. So let's say display message, right? Then I say Control S to save it. Then I scroll down to text. You see, even though I changed the name of the label, it still hasn't shown over here. So when I go to text and I put in display message, and I do Control S, now you can see it displayed over there. But the text we have here, it doesn't look more appropriate. So let's go to our fonts to make some little changes. So I go to font and then let's make it a little bold, and let's increase the size to, let's say 18. Alright, and then let's choose OK. So we have our display message here. This looks more appropriate. The next thing we're going to use is a button. So we look here for a button. As I said, you get used to them as you use them. That's the only way you get used to them. So we choose a button here, and then we change the name of our button. Button 1 is not appropriate. Anytime you're naming a button, you use BTN, meaning button. Then you add the name of the button. So with this button, let's call it click here. So you are telling the user to click here whenever he or she sees this, and then Control S to save it. Then we move down to text, and then right there click here, right, and then Control S. Now you can see click here over there, and then as usual the font isn't that appropriate, so we go to font and then we make it bold and increase the size. So we go to bold and let's make the size let's say 16 and OK. So let's increase it a little. Click here. Alright, now since it's a button, we can add more features to it. We can actually change the background of just this button. So let's make the background, let's say blue. So I look for background. So you can see a back color. Right now it's white, so I can change it from white to, let's say, blue. So let's look for blue here. Okay, highlights. So I use highlights. Now you can see the color is now blue. Now let's change the color of the click here, which is a text. So I'll look for something called 4-color. Now with this 4-color, you can see control text, right? So the control text right now is black. I want to change it to, let's say, red. There are so many ways you can change. We have the custom, the web, and then the system. As I said, you get used to them by using them. So let's choose something red here. Just for this, let me go Control Z. Just for the click here. Just for the click here, not for both of them. So for the click here, we use red. Alright, so you can see click here in there. Alright, so now that we have our box here, which is going to display our message. Alright, now what message do we want to display? We want to display hello world. As a programmer, that's the first thing we always learn, how to print hello world or how to display hello world. So in Visual Basic, what you do is that if you want to code behind your design, you double click on the actionable button. Now the button which is actionable here is click here, which is the button. This display message is just a label, but the one that's really going to perform the action is the button. So we double click on click here. Now when I double click, it is going to take me to the background of the button. So this is just behind the button. Now behind the button, this is where we actually write our code. So you can see public class here, and we have our procedure, private sub, and then end sub. So you can see that Visual Studio has actually provided us with a procedure, so we don't have to even memorize it. We just write our code inside the procedure. So you can see the name we gave to the button, which is BTN click here. So The method or the handle for this is click, meaning the customer has to click on that button. The same thing here, handle here. So the event is going to be BTN click here. So you must click on that button. Now, when the user clicks on that button, what should happen? We want to display hello world. So we say, if we want to display hello world in Visual Basic, which is going to be a message, we use something we call message box. We say MSG box, which is message box. Then we bring our parentheses, and then because we are going to print a message, we use a string, which is double quotation marks, and we type in hello world, right? Then Control S. Now we save. So the moment the user clicks on this button, it is going to display to the user hello world. So that's going to be the message. So we are going to have a message box that is going to contain hello world the moment the user clicks on that button. Now, is what I'm saying really true? If it's really true, let's find out by running our code. So I'll go back to the design. This is the design we made, right? So we can actually change the background of our design too. So by clicking once on the surface, and then let's try to change the background before we run our code. So the back color right now is kind of white. So we can change it to, let's say, active caption. Right, this one looks more guy. I'll say. So Control S, we save. Now let's run our code to see how it looks. So it's building or debugging our code behind, and afterwards it's going to run it to show us our window, or the window we just made, our Windows form. So it takes a while to debug and run the code. Alright, here we go. So you can see starting diagnostic tools. Alright, so this is the form we just created. You see, this is not C++ or Java where you just code and then you don't see anything. This one you see what you are doing. So this is what we just created, right? Display message and then click here. So I'm going to click here, which is I'm going to click on this button to see, is it really going to show us hello world, right? So I'm going to click on it right now. So you see, click here. Now you see session 1 hello world, right? Meaning our code is running properly. So we're able to create a design, a UI that is a user interface that anytime our customer sees the UI and then clicks on that button, the button is going to show hello world. Alright friends, so this will be the end of today's session for Friday Night Live Coding. In our second session, we'll be using more of the tools and then the properties. I'm going to end the code here. I'm going to close and then stop. Alright, so in our second session, we will be building more apps in Visual Basic, which will be very involving, meaning we'll be using more of the tools and then the properties, and you should really be prepared for that. So that's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the channel running. Until then, apart here.